I interviewed there and I really fell in love with this idea of building perfect products. And that's what kind of got me excited about Apple from the outside. I just assumed like, oh, wow, like when you build 1 million phones a day, you have to have perfection in how you do it, because they're otherwise like even, 1% fallout would be way too many units. There's no way. And I was just really curious and wanted to learn the secrets of building perfect products.
In this episode of The Bomb, Engineering a Path Forward, we take a hard look at what it means to pivot. Pivot in startups, pivot in mission statements, and even pivoting in what a fairly chosen career path might look like. I'm your host, Majenta Strongheart, and I'm beyond excited to sit down with Anna-Katrina Shedletsky, the co-founder and CEO of Instrumental. If you haven't heard of Instrumental yet, don't worry, you will soon. Instrumental is focused on one of the most important aspects of the manufacturing world today: creating a more efficient quality tracking system in the production process that so many hardware companies rely on. From the beginning, Anna and the whole team at Instrumental asked the question, how do we increase yield, decrease wasted product, downtime in production, and critical mistakes in the products and electronics that you're probably listening to this podcast on? This is my conversation with Anna-Katrina Shedletsky, and this is The Bomb. We live in a time where design and technology touch every aspect of our lives. But where did it all come from? Who designed it? How was it built and brought to market? What will it look like in a year, 2 years, 100 years? From the phones and smartwatches that help us in our day-to-day to the cutting-edge spaceships and 3D printers that are leading us into the future, modern design is constantly shaping the way we work, communicate, problem solve, and play. And every new design, big or small, starts with an idea and a bill of materials. I'm Majenta Strongheart, and this is The Bomb, where we talk to leading innovators in the tech world and celebrate the transformational power of design. Hi, Anna. Welcome to The Bomb. Thank you so much for the time today. I'm really excited to be here at Instrumental in Palo Alto and learn all about what you do and what Instrumental's up to.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'd love to just start with a little bit of your kind of background and origin story. I am always interested when folks go from engineering to founding their own company, and I think that's something that a lot of our audience can relate to. So I'd love to just hear what first got you interested in engineering and kind of your pathway from studying that to doing it in the field to now being a founder for a number of years, a decent amount of time now.
Yeah. Wow, that's a big question.
It's a lot.
And how far back do I go?
Whatever you think is relevant to your kind of growth journey.
Yeah. So when I graduated from college, it was during the 2008-2009 recession, which is a bad time to come into the job market.
Yes.
And I was really having a hard time finding a job, but I went and I asked a professor about where could I look or what types of companies might be interested in someone like me. And he was like, oh, well, you should go interview at Apple. And at the time, I'm like super naive, and I didn't even think that Apple made physical things. I think now it's maybe people were always aware, and I was just very naive and in a bubble. But back in 2008, it was a little less. They were only on iPhone 3, I think, at that point, or iPhone 2.
But I also love that your professor was just like, Apple, why not?
He had connections at Apple.
No, it makes sense.
But so I interviewed there, and I really fell in love with this idea of building perfect products. And that's what kind of got me excited about Apple from the outside. I just assumed oh, wow, when you build 1 million phones a day, you have to have perfection in how you do it, because they're otherwise even 1% fallout would be way too many units. There's no way. And I was just really curious and wanted to learn the secrets of building perfect products. And so I started at Apple. And on day 2, I realized they do not ship at 99% yields. And there's it's actually very difficult to build perfect products. And I think Apple is up there with the best in class around execution and quality. And it's even a problem for them. And over the 6 years that I was there, I led a handful of programs, including iPad programs, the first generation Apple Watch, and really got to see firsthand how difficult it is to build perfect products. But I also felt like we could do a lot better than we were doing. And so decided to start a company to build technology to selfishly make my job as a product design engineer like a lot easier, to help engineers like me find and fix issues on the manufacturing line. And so my co-founder and I, we both worked together at Apple. We started this company back in 2015 to do just that.
And so what at that time when you were at Apple, what was being used for kind of manufacturing efficiency and for some of the challenges that you're now addressing with your tool, with Instrumental's product?
Yeah, so it's actually one of my favorite parts of the job was traveling to China and standing on the line and being part of the manufacturing process and being in the factories and working with the engineers in the factories. But being in the right place at the right time was kind of the method for finding and fixing issues during development, during the NPI, new product introduction process. And luck is not a strategy.
Yeah. Chance.
And so that just seems like, you know, it really was dissonant with this idea of like, well, I'm an engineer. We should be able to create a solution here for how to solve this problem. So certainly like world-class producers of complex electronics products have lots of testing on their lines and lots of reliability, validation they do. But anybody who's worked in this industry for even a short period of time can tell you that like that net is not a perfect, it's a net. There's many holes where things can get through, and it can be very difficult to actually find those problems in the first place because you really have to be in the right place at the right time. So what are we replacing? Luck.
Yeah.
Like, can we create more certainty around the ability to actually discover and fix problems? And that's relevant not just for development, which was, you know, that was the soup that I was living in at Apple. It was very development focused, but also in production, because things, as much as our operations friends like to, you know, think that nothing changes in production, it's solid, it's set. Things change in production all the time. Operators turn over, suppliers change. You're actually trying to roll out improvements. So you are making changes to the design. So it's kind of an interesting interplay between the universal need to find and fix issues on a manufacturing line, regardless of what part of the product lifecycle you're in.
And I think a huge part of that that I've heard discussed before as well, that I'm pretty sure, you know, you guys are really focused on is kind of capturing that data too. Like it's not only about discovery necessarily or kind of, but it's the tracking and like centralizing all of these kind of like field notes maybe, or the anything that people are observing that's really maybe less kind of quantifiable throughout the process, right?
Yeah, it's a find and fix.
Yes. And like what was being used when you were, again, kind of inspired to address this problem? It's like spreadsheets, it was people's notebooks, like I imagine it was all kinds of things.
There was a lot of units that just go through the line that no one ever sees. Actually, at Apple and probably other companies, one of the things that I was really inspired by is end of line check. PD check is what it was called. I'm a product design engineer. PD stands for product design. And essentially every day during a development build, the units at the end of the line would get collected up. And there would be, you know, at the end of the shift, a PD engineer would come by and would look at every single unit that had been built that day. Now, it was a finished good. So we were pressing all the buttons, turning the crowns, looking at the flatness of the glass. And it was really looking at a large number of units all at the same time, compare and contrast, where everything's very fresh in your mind, that you're able to see, like, what is the general quality of what we're producing? Do we have like a proudness issue with the cover glass on like, you know, 20% of these units? You get like a sense of how bad the problem is, how frequent, how do the buttons feel. Sometimes you've built multiple configurations, so you're actually able to evaluate them with these kind of more softer, harder to measure kind of feedback about what's going on. Because you're not doing, well, in those days, we're not doing 100% measurement of every single unit for every single dimension. You're just getting a general feel. And so really found that as an inspiring way to, when you have all of that data, when you have a collection that you can look at all together, you can get a really good sense of kind of where your quality's at.
So, okay, I'm going to rewind a little bit. So you guys, a big part of your offering is the cameras in the facilities, right? So you capture the data, but are you installing those cameras or helping with that? Or do factories tend to just have these already? Because I'm like, you're covering so much ground as far as that goes.
Yeah. Well, when you're building a company in the industrial space, my perspective is you have to be vertically integrated and offer a full end-to-end solution because your customers, you're going in, you don't know what they're going to have. And so you shouldn't assume that they're going to have things. You should be able to put something in to be able to provide value really quickly.
And generally, I would say companies are working with a ton of CMs. I mean, they're not just going to have one that they care about tracking.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we also are modular. So if our customers have something, like there's $1 billion of industrial cameras sold every year, that's fine. We can plug that data in. We're really a software company. You can see in the background here, though, we have physical hardware. And these are drop-in stations.
That's what I didn't realize, actually, when I was first looking into what you guys do. So that's really interesting.
This is a lubricant to be able to get to value very quickly. Our goals with customers is that they can get value within 90 days of having instrumental on their line. Sometimes they get value in like negative 12 hours of when we actually start, because the first test image that comes through at a customer is looking at literally one image from the line. It was like, wait, that's wrong.
Wow. Yeah.
And so even just having much better access to this data, not everybody can stand on the line all day. And frankly, that's a pretty inefficient way to spend time. It's still good every once in a while to understand how things get made, but it's much more efficient to be able to look through that data set very rapidly and find those issues to focus on.
And also with more and more folks being remote and distributed and spread out and this sort of thing, it's not, I think, as common anymore for people to be in person at these places, I would imagine, with how things have evolved over the last couple of years. And so do you guys have like a sweet spot as far as the volume that you're the best company that fits for instrumental, for who you're trying to work with? Is it based on volume? Is it based on what exactly they're focused on shipping, a specific industry, vertical, or who are you guys trying to address, or who do you think the solution is best for?
So it's based on value. Okay. In terms of value to the company, our customers. Because
it's super modular, you probably are able to address so many different.
There's nothing about the technology that restricts it to like only work for electronics. However, most of our customers building electronics. So we kind of have two segments we work in. There's a high volume electronic market. So think consumer electronics, headphones, etc. Bose is a customer, as an example. We also work in the mission critical electronic space, which is a made up term that is a catch-all for telecommunications, servers, electrification equipment, all sorts of stuff that gets either like is more industrial or gets sold to other businesses, because that stuff needs to work. So we work on radios for firefighters, for example, like the buttons that say like call versus turn off need to be the right buttons.
You need these things to not fail.
You want them to work because lives could be on the line. So those are kind of the two spaces that we work. We also, as part of that mission critical space, we work in the aerospace and defense as well. And so when we discuss with customers, it's usually about the value and the cost of failure. And sometimes that cost of failure is very prescient. They know exactly what it is because they are currently having those failures. And then development, it's about the value of speed to market and how quickly can they bring this product to market at what level of quality to reduce returns and also have great Amazon reviews right when they announce the product.
Key, definitely key. Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much. I feel like you've painted a really in-depth picture of the solution, what you guys do, how you provide value. I want to rewind again a little bit back to like your experience transitioning into a founder. I think we have a lot of people that would be interested, kind of on what was that process like, going from, okay, I've identified this challenge in my day-to-day and I see that my peers as well at other companies, this is an issue. And what gave you kind of the push to say, I'm going to address this and start a company to solve this?
Yeah. So I did not think that I was going to be an entrepreneur. I'm very risk adverse, and this is not like a line of business you get into if you're risk adverse. I was really passionate about the problem. And also, I think I've shared this story, but I had a personal tragedy happen in my life that made me kind of reevaluate how I was spending my time. And I felt that, while I was this happened while I was working on Apple Watch before it was announced. And I was like, this is great. I'm so glad I had this experience working at Apple, but there's got to be something bigger out there for me to work on to have a bigger impact. And, what do I know? What could I influence? And it's like, well, I know how to build millions of things at very high levels of quality. After doing 4 programs at Apple, I felt like I'd learned that and was passionate about that. but I also knew why it was hard. And so I was essentially inspired to go try to solve the big problem. And both myself and my co-founder, Sam, who is our CTO, were both inspired by the problem. And you could say there's like a selfish bit in there of like, if we fail, we have to go back to being mechanical engineers without this solution. So there's a bit of that.
It's a good drive.
Yeah, but it's like, this should exist. And when we talk to customers and other engineers about like, oh, we do this thing, and they're like, oh, I had that idea.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, and we're doing it. So it's not necessarily that the idea is so novel, it's the actual execution of like how we make this work. And so it's been really great. I'm really glad that I took the leap. I think when, something, the kind of the way I would put it is when the worst day of your life has already happened, like you have no fear for a period of time, and you just go take a leap and do something completely different that is very meaningful to you.
Absolutely. And so I love that you focused on like the falling in love with the problem versus the solution. And this is something actually that it's interesting. This just was coming up. I was at like a small VC conference, and founders were saying that, like that's really important. If you fall in love with the solution, of course, you're going to be chasing maybe the wrong issues and get too far away from the problem. So I'm kind of curious, was there any early iterations of things that you'd be willing to share that were, just you learned that wasn't the right route to go down, but you knew this was still the problem you're trying to address, and you've gotten to where you are today, which is amazing, and you guys are really addressing the challenge with the right kind of tools. I'm curious, what were those throwaway concepts early on?
Yeah, I absolutely can share. So when we started the company, we thought we were going to be a robot company. So Sam and I are mechanical engineers, right? And you like,
that's way more exciting to work on than software.
You bring what you know. And at the time, so like 2015, going back then, industrial robots, they were less of a thing than they are now. And there was this idea that you could build like omni robots that could essentially replace people, human operators. And we're like, we're not going to do that. That's too hard. Omni task is too hard. We'll just do like a 4-function robot, can do these 4 things. And then we'll use the robot as a Trojan horse for data. We'll take pictures and we'll like do analysis. And then that'll be our data set to build the software product that, ultimately instrumental became. And we actually raised our first dollars on that concept. And literally we incorporated the company to take investor dollars and customer dollars. So we've had a customer since day 2. And we went to China to support an early build for that product. And while I was there, I was also interviewing a bunch of factories because I was trying to figure out like, okay, if we're going to build robots, we're going to have to sell them to factories. How's this going to work? And essentially I realized after talking, literally 1 week trip to China, talking to a bunch of factories, there's no way they're going to buy robots from us ever. Ever. And the reason is because they feel very confident building their own robots. Why would they can build their own automation? Why would they work with a third party to build this kind of automation? It seemed like it was going to be an uphill battle. And then so Sam and I got together and we were like, well, it seems like this would be really hard. What if we just like scrap the robot part, reduce the complexity of this company and focus on software? And so that was the thread that we pulled on. And we essentially 2 weeks after we raised money, we pivoted not the problem, but the solution space away from complex robotics to let's be a software company. And our hardware that we build is going to just be what we need to lubricate our process into our customers to be able to integrate easily into what they're doing, and to keep as much technology as possible out of the hardware, and have all the technology or as much as possible in the software that we provide.
We're going to take a quick break for a few words from our incredible sponsors. When we come back, we dive headfirst into the lessons Anna learned in the process of raising money in the volatile world of startups, venture capitalists, and how to maintain that drive to craft fundraising pitches. Welcome back to The Bomb, Engineering a Path Forward. I'm your host, Majenta Strongheart, and when we left off, we were talking about the vital pivot CEO Anna-Katrina made with Instrumental within a week of getting her initial funding from robots to software. Okay, I'm going to also go back to something you were talking about. Obviously, raising money is a big part of this part of having a startup, being a founder. And you guys just completed Series C. Is that right?
Yeah, we've raised $80 million total.
Congratulations. That's incredible. Could you speak a little bit to some of the challenges or things that you just like learned in the first round versus now? You know, how different is it raising money? How many years in are we now? If you started in 2015?
9 years in. Yeah,
you know,
long time.
8 or 9 years later, how does that evolve over time?
I actually very much enjoy the fundraising process. I love talking about the problem and our space and the industry, what our team is accomplishing. So that's great. I think one of the things that's really interesting about venture, and it has always been the case, but now that I've had a company and so been like aware of kind of what's happening a little bit more, as the market dramatically changes. What is in, what is out, what is hot, what is not, what the metrics you need, and it's constantly changing. So if I was to try to nuggetize that advice for future founders or current founders, I think it's just find a cohort of founders who are at or ideally like 18 months ahead of where you're at, and use them as kind of like a circle of not only support, but also advice and understanding of where the market is. Like what was their latest experience when they went out. And I found that to be incredibly impactful throughout all the rounds. I have good folks in my network that I've like call up, and I'll either run my deck by them and they'll give feedback, or they can give me some insights into how different investors are kind of valuing different metrics or what they care about. So you can really tailor those pitches. I think another thing that I learned, and this comes from sales in general, like it's just CEOs do a lot of selling. You sell candidates to come work at your company. You sell your product because you're often like one of the first salespeople, and you sell shares in your company to investors. So you're mostly just doing selling all of the time.
Nice. No, that makes a lot of sense. And like you said, kind of learning the right ways to frame it to different folks, and also depending on kind of the season and the bigger picture context that you guys are going into. And so you've mentioned your co-founder, Sam, a couple of times. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you think the value of having a co-founder is. I think maybe in some ways it seems obvious to folks, but I think it's always interesting to hear different stories, and also what you think people should look for to know who a compatible co-founder might be.
Yeah. Trust and respect is probably like the first one. So I met Sam actually. He was an intern at Apple when I started full time, and starting full time, I felt more like an intern than like a full time. I was just like fresh out of school, just like them. And so we actually share a first patent during his like summer internship. We worked on a project together and patented this switch that will never go into production, but there is a patent on it. And so that's kind of when we met back in 2009. And then we got the opportunity to work together on Apple Watch. And I had traveled with Sam like to vendors to like solve problems. We'd been on the line like late together, like not with not enough sleep, trying to solve real hard problems. And so it was this great opportunity to kind of pressure test a relationship. And there's a lot of mutual respect there. And so it was kind of a no-brainer actually when I had to convince him to leave Apple to like come on this journey. Sam and I are actually very similar. And so maybe one of the downsides of our partnership, well, we're different. We have similar backgrounds, but like we are both mechanical engineers with similar experience set. He's better at certain things and I'm better at other things. And so that's complementary. I think it's great when co-founders have like very different skills because it adds to the diversity of background and opinion that you can have in the company. That being said, like Instrumental is very engineer focused organization. We build technology for engineers by engineers. And so there's a benefit to having someone who innately understands our customers, the problem, has experienced it firsthand as a partner. So that's a major pro.
And it's awesome to hear that, 8 or 9 years later, like that's huge. I think there's often, I've definitely seen in the different startups and things I've seen over the years, of course, like founders breaking apart, finding new co-founders, whatnot, so to be in it for so long and still feel that way about your co-founder is huge. And I think speaks to some of the, like you said, the early things that were the important values early on in the relationship, the respect, the trust.
One of the other things that Sam and I discussed very early on is how we make decisions, which I think is a really important thing to talk about.
Definitely.
And also like what success looks like for that person and kind of how this fits into their story and narrative, and making sure those are all aligned.
An awesome like pro tip or kind of insight. I feel like that's huge to kind of outline how are we going to go through things. Then you just have this roadmap every time to go back to. And then it's almost like having that mediator or something. So it's not a, you think this way, I think this way, but let's just follow these steps that we both agreed on early on. Yeah. That's an amazing tactic. I love that. But I'm going to kind of want to go off on this tangent, just something you mentioned about, I know is more related to your work at Apple, but patenting something, which I think is an interesting topic, especially with how quickly technology is moving, of course. And we've had some of these conversations at events at Design Lab and also with other guests on the pod. I'd love to just hear your perspective on kind of where you think that's going as far as the kind of politics around it. And do you think it's worth it for certain companies like to focus on kind of the proprietary knowledge and patenting things, or making sure, you know, they're protecting that versus just moving quickly, iterating, focusing on the technology? Or is it really worth it in some cases? Obviously, at Apple, they have all the lawyers and the backing to make things happen quickly like that. But in the startup world, sometimes it can feel overwhelming, or you have to prioritize what you're focused on. Yeah.
So it's all about what your strategy is. So I would say it's important to have a strategy. The reason that Apple and Samsung and Google and all these huge companies incentivize so highly their employees to invent and patent their inventions, like they often pay bonuses to inventors for this, is because it's not necessarily offense, it's actually defense. So when they get sued by a competitor for violating a patent, they can countersue for like, well, here's 10 other patents you're violating of ours, right? Yeah. And so and this plays out in public. So you can find these examples. And so that's why large companies do that. Does that make sense for startups? I personally don't think so. Yeah. Maybe there are certain startup strategies where that makes sense. Maybe you're trying to be acquired, and so your patent portfolio is really important to the value of the technology versus trying to be a big standalone business on your own. Instrumental's perspective is a little bit more nuanced. We have technology that goes into countries in the world that do not necessarily respect patents and intellectual property. Right. And you can't change reality. So you have to adapt to reality. And so our general kind of patent strategy has been, well, if it goes, if it's going to be deployed to all these various places, we should have as little technology as possible in there. And we're not going to try to protect or patent that stuff. So we'll trademark our logo and our brand, et cetera. But we're not going to patent stuff in our physical station because there's no way to protect that IP. In order to make a patent make sense, it has to be protectable, defendable. You have to be able to prove that someone is violating your patent. So I guess another pro tip maybe for the entrepreneurs out there who are thinking about, wanting to patent a piece of their core technology, try to figure out how you can defend from the sides and behind and in front, with, an initial first patent, is to find a patent agent versus using high cost patent counsel from your corporate counsel. Will significantly reduce your costs to actually file patents. Patents are expensive. It's like $25,000 or so to get through the whole process on the low end. So it's a big investment. And so you should use it very tactfully to make sure that you can defend core pieces of your product so that they're not rapidly copied.
That's awesome. I love that. And next up, we have what is on your personal bill of materials, which you can interpret however you like.
Personal bill of materials. I think that it's time to do something for myself. And so there's a couple things that I really enjoy doing. I like cooking. And I like sewing and making things in a different kind of realm of making. And that time I find is very useful for just creating space in my brain.
Absolutely. Just having some of those other outlets to feed creativity and and just like probably getting back to more hands-on stuff because maybe you don't do as much. But I didn't realize when I first was learning about Instrumental that you guys do have the hardware component. So you are probably getting a little bit still of the hardware prototyping, excitement. But
well, we get the excitement of all the customers we support and everything
and what they're working on.
And that's really exciting. You can get you don't have to own all the problems.
Totally. You're like, actually, it's kind of nice to like address them, deal with them, and then not own them all the time, not have to take them home every time. And then last but not least, just want to give you the opportunity to tell us what you're excited about next for Instrumental and anything else you wanted to mention about what you guys are focused on.
Yeah. So I guess one of the areas, there's maybe two things. So one that's maybe very relevant to this audience is we recently launched the Build Better Handbook, which is essentially writing a book in public about how to be great at design, new product introduction, production, operations, quality, all of that. We have interviews with great leaders in the quality space, operations, engineering leadership, on how to do those jobs well. And that's been really exciting for the company. And it's out there. You can find it on our website, instrumental.com, the Build Better Handbook. Check it out. There's tons there.
Awesome.
So that's something we're really excited about. And the interviews that we're doing with these amazing leaders that have been in our networks or that we've gotten introduced to, we've learned a lot from. And it's been even really influencing how I lead as a leader. So that's awesome. And then the other kind of exciting thing for us is that we are launching into the aerospace and defense space. It's new market for us that we're learning a lot about. So that's kind of an up and coming thing for the company that hopefully there'll be more to talk about soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was already going to say, I hope I can invite you and maybe we can bring Sam, your co-founder, or anyone else from the team for a part 2, because I really don't feel like we got to everything. There were so many like starts of ideas. I was like, we could go down this rabbit hole and have this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today and just the range of what we covered. We covered a lot of ground, from going from engineering to founder to patent strategy to, just being a up to Series C startup and what that looks like evolving over the years. So thank you so much, Anna. It was a pleasure, and I hope we can invite you guys back for more in the future.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
That was Anna-Katrina Shedletsky and her amazing journey from Apple product design engineer to CEO of Instrumental. Her insight on how to protect your invention, knowing when to pivot in your company's path, and how to fall in love with problems rather than solutions should easily light a fire in the hearts and minds of any emerging engineer. This has been The Bomb, Engineering a Path Forward. We'll see you next time. If you like The Bomb, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Supplyframe and Hackaday on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Design Lab at Supplyframe Design Lab on Instagram and Twitter. The Bomb is a Supplyframe podcast produced by me, Majenta Strongheart, and Ryan Tillotson. Written by Maggie Bowles and edited by Daniel Ferreira. Theme music is by Anna Hogbin, show art by Thomas Schneider, special thanks to Giovanni Salinas, Bruce Dominguez, Thomas Woodward, Jin Kumar, Jordan Clark, the entire Supplyframe team, and you, our wonderful listeners. I'm your host, Majenta Strongheart. See you next week.